I do not enjoy management. I'd rather look at what's the most value I can create with the smallest team possible, rather than how do I grow this thing.
How did you come up to the realization that what you wanted was just continuing bootstrapping?
After the first business, what I wanted was a lot of time to think and reflect. I wanted a lot of time.
Hey, Bootstrappers! Welcome to Bootstrap Stories, the podcast where founders, marketers, and thoughtful leaders share the most actionable tips on building a successful business. After meeting with hundreds of bootstrappers in the past years, I figured out that we all struggle to grow our businesses. But the truth is that most of us don't know where to ask for help or advice. That's why I decided to start this podcast, to give you all the keys to succeed at every stage of your business. All the tested strategies for solving your struggles and taking your business to a new level. No fluff, no bullshit, only a real talk between friends that help each other succeed.
My guest for this episode is Rob Fitzpatrick, serial entrepreneur and author of the super famous book, The Mom Test. Hey, Rob, I'm so happy to have you on the show.
It's a delight to be here. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, we're so excited. And before we get started, I want to outline a bit the few topics that we want to discuss today. First, I want to talk about your background of going from, being an entrepreneur that made the switch from a VC-backed startup to running actually like multiple bootstrap businesses, and also understand why you made that switch. After that, I'd love to talk about, the mistakes that you have made, and that, by sharing them, maybe other entrepreneurs can avoid. And
finally, that's a long list.
We'll try to focus on the biggest one. and finally, I'd love to understand also from your expertise, how exactly do you manage to learn from your customers, and how do you approach them to really get valuable information that you can transform into business insights? Sounds good?
Sounds great. I'm looking forward to it. And I think we can have some good combos on all of those.
Excited as well. So let's go back a bit, onto your journey, and maybe you can start a bit talking about your first business and what got you started.
I got started because I wanted a career that would allow me to chase interesting ideas with as little BS as possible. And back in university, with the enthusiastic naivety of youth, I thought that was academia. And so I went to grad school at Georgia Institute of Technology, and I was doing my master's research. And as I started to make friends with professors, I realized I'd made a huge mistake, and that there was, in fact, a little bit of bureaucracy and BS in the academic world. And so about that time, I found some of Paul Graham's essays. Y Combinator was brand new at that time. They'd only been around for 2 years, I want to say. This was 2007. So we applied. And during the interview, PG said, this is a terrible idea. I basically took my master's research and applied it because what I saw in startups seemed to be what I wanted from academia originally, which was a BS-free world where the best ideas win. So I was like, cool, I've got a direct connection. If I do a good job, I'll succeed. If I do a bad job, I'll fail. And PG basically said, it's a terrible idea. It'll never work. It'll never scale. I was like, man, why'd you fly us to California to tell us that? That's so mean. And it's a 10-minute interview. It's very short. And he said, well, I like the team. You can build good products. You clearly have good taste. And so things are very different now, right? Because they're bigger. But back then they were still kind of an upstart. He said, if you can come up with an idea that doesn't suck, probably we'll fund it. And so we asked for his help. He said, sure. We did a little 5-minute idea jam. And at the end of the day, they called us back and said, sure, if you want to do that idea, we'll fund it. Wow. So basically threw away everything we'd done so far. We restarted, got the team. And at the time it was in Boston. Then afterwards moved to San Francisco. And really we're in a mode of just reactively chasing funding. And this was true from tip to tail. So every business decision we made, every pivot we made, every international relocation we made, we ended up moving to London. Because the San Francisco investors, we ended up building ad tech, right? Just every choice we made was how do we get the next bit of funding, which is an easy trap to fall into when you're a new entrepreneur. Because at that point, you don't have your own compass or your own way to judge whether you're succeeding or failing. Sometimes the metrics that would make it obvious are too far in the future. So you look for a proximate goal, or you look for this parent figure to give you the approval. And so I think a lot of people, including ourselves, we use the investors as that. So we did well at that, but like meanwhile we failed to build a business, right? So 3 years later, it was clear that we were starting to fail. We were doing 1 year like big enterprise sales driven contracts with customers, so we had to ramp it down over a year to make good on those contracts. And then I was just so burned out after that, physically burned out, emotionally burned out, mentally burned out. And the whole reason I got into business was to avoid the BS, right? It was to have a direct connection with my customers. It was to let the best idea win. It was to build things I cared about. And so I was like, like all of that somehow, and this is totally my fault. The investors we had treated us very respectfully. They had a lot of opportunities to screw us over during the 2008 financial crisis, when we needed bridge funding, during some hard pivots. They had every opportunity and they never did. They said, like we shook hands on this deal. We're going to honor that handshake, even when they had all of the. So this is just me. I wasn't at the maturity level where I could handle that. And so I was like, okay, given where I'm at, what makes more sense? And so it's like bootstrapping silly projects with friends. I did a bunch of stuff. I was just eager to learn. I did a real world co-working business. I kickstarted a board game. I set up an education agency. I built a bunch of silly tech products. I wrote books. I wanted to get experience with as many different product categories as I could, just to build out my understanding. And now it's been 15 years. A couple of those have been multi-million-dollar businesses. Early on, I had a lot of mistakes, a lot of failures. I had to take my knocks. But recently, it feels like, okay, things are going better. And the last few have tended to work relatively stress-free.
And that's actually really nice. I want to go back a bit, to that stage where you were chasing for the next round of fundings and not really focusing, on the value that you would bring maybe like to your customers. Like what was kind of like the business model at the time? So you mentioned you were selling like enterprise deals. So were you profitable? Were you not really? Or
we were definitely not profitable, despite selling like $20,000 a year contracts to big enterprise customers. But this is an insane series of pivots. It's hard to carry this, but you have to understand, like, we didn't know what we were doing, and we were like chasing the funding. And so my master's research, what we originally pitched to YC, was essentially a category of educational serious video games to basically help kids learn morality or philosophy. But then we're like, oh, wait, there's no market for that. So almost even before the pitch, we'd shifted it and we'd be like, where can we apply these core? And we're like, music has serious themes. Can we make like serious music games and it was like kind of weird and convoluted. What YC encouraged us into was an animation builder. So basically to take the animation and interactive and like music sensitive and this like all the tech we built, but make it user generated instead of us being the creators, which, fine, made sense, still seemed fun. So we set out and we were applying it for kids. We're like, okay, kids will use this to make cartoons, because we had a really good builder. It was kind of, you would drag characters around, they would bounce to the music, everything was automatically synced. It was like really fun to use, really playful. Would have worked brilliantly on an iPhone or iPad with a touchscreen, but we were kind of pre that era. So it was still using Flash. And then we're like, okay, so how do we make money? What's the business model, right? You start asking yourself these questions. But at this time, we were asking one question at a time. We started with what's interesting to us. Then we started with like, what's fun to users. Then we started with like, how do we monetize it? And so these things didn't really fit together into a cohesive business model. It was like one idea after the other, just bolted onto each other. And so we're like, okay, well, we've got this animation, we've got kids, maybe brands will want to put their characters, their musicians, their music, their clothing, their whatever into these cartoons, and then kids can use it for user-generated content. They were like, ooh, but that requires us to get scale. Maybe we could white label it. And we just kept making these half-baked decisions where we were trying to add a revenue model onto a product we already had. Well, what you want to do is you want to build those things obviously together, right? As a holistic system. And we weren't doing that. And then when things weren't working, we kept making wacky pivots. We'd go like, okay, the simple animator isn't growing fast enough. Let's make a complicated animator and compete with Adobe because it reuses the same. That was just like a 6-month diversion that made no sense. But we eventually did find a business essentially white labeling the entire product. So not including brands' products in our consumer app, but white labeling the whole app to brands. And it was used by Sony Pictures, Sony Music, the BBC, a few other big brands that you would know, Roxy, who makes swimwear.
Yes. Yeah.
And we had a lot of fun doing it. The people who make Wallace and Gromit, they used it for a campaign, I believe. But we found that everyone used it once.
Okay.
So after Sony Pictures had used it for one movie, they were like, cool, we've done that, on to the next thing. And that was something that was really hard for us to anticipate. The sales cycle was super long. We had no retention, and it was like a super long, expensive sales cycle for a one-time deal. And we weren't able to charge enough money. And then the 2008 crash cut all of the experimental advertising budgets. So when we were doing like customer conversations and pre-sales, like before the 2008 crash, everyone's like, yeah, we have infinite money. We'll try anything. Who cares? And then immediately afterwards, it was a very different tone. But by then we'd already raised the funding. We had a little team, and we sort of felt like we got to make the best of it. And then our final pivot was like, okay, brands really care about user-generated content and social media and advertising. And so we tried to mash those together into kind of like a safe social advertising thing that, we just never completed. And it was a classic case of what I talked about in the mom test, where every brand said, yeah, that's amazing, so innovative, so incredible, we would love to use that. And then we built it, and then they're like, never mind. We're like, what's going on here? And so that was the question that I was really wrestling with after that business shut down.
And when you started building like another bootstrap business, so you started testing various different projects, as you mentioned, like writing a book, testing board games, like launching new like businesses, etc.
So these were less tests because I wasn't trying to figure out if they worked or not, and it was more project. It was curiosity. I was like, I want to understand physical manufacturing. I want to understand running a business that operates out of a physical space. And so I found ways to do that, and I expected them to break even or be profitable, and most of them did, but I didn't expect them to be scalable, and I didn't expect that I would do them forever. They were like 6 months, like meant to be like mini projects, make a profit, break even. But the primary point was just me learning. For example, I learned I do not like physical manufacturing. Like it is really hard to quality control a physical product unless you're willing to go to the factories and act as the factory's manager. But that's only viable if you're doing it at big scale, if you have big projects. And so it's actually, I don't understand how all these little drop shipping businesses are doing it without physically going to China or Germany or wherever their factories are. Because otherwise the quality variation you get is just insane. And then how do you deal with that as an entrepreneur where you don't know what's going to show up in the box that your customers are paying for?
I think for dropshipping, to be honest, is just that the guys like running this business, usually they don't care about the quality of what they deliver. They want to make quick cash and just run away. But then what was the one bootstrap business when you started thinking, the bootstrap route? Because obviously it's nice to launch project where you break even, etc. But down the line, you want to build things that will be profitable, that would be sustainable also for you as an entrepreneur. So when was the stage when you started thinking, okay, I'm with my new bootstrap business, it's working well, I'm profitable, and I want to continue it that way? Because back then, if you go back, to your first business being VC backed, you also that money obviously can help you hire faster, do other things. And of course, it's not always the best route, but how did you come up to the realization that what you wanted was just continuing bootstrapping versus that, okay, I've learned all the things, I've made all those mistakes, now I want to do it I know I'm going to do it well, I'm going to take funding and not do the same mistakes.
So there were a few parts of the kind of the VC-backed or the hypergrowth industry that for me were really tough to deal with. One is that I do not enjoy management. I do not enjoy the check-ins. I do not enjoy. I do best as a sole contributor where I'm quite strong. And I'm now finally learning management, but I'm now 15 years into business and I'm still having a hard time with it. It's just not a skill that came naturally to me. So the idea of hiring and scaling a big team was, that's actually a negative value to me, not a positive value. I'd rather look at what's the most value I can create with the smallest team possible, rather than how do I grow this thing. Another issue is that I find that my energy and my enthusiasm is quite cyclical, like a sine curve. And there's, on the scale of months or years, I'm very productive. And I think I've built some businesses and some stuff that I'm really proud of. But on a week by week basis, or even sometimes month by month, when you're doing your board meetings, your check-ins with the VC, there'd be weeks where I'm just like, I'm sorry, I had a bad week. I did nothing, and that's a pretty stressful meeting. And so I found that I was trying to increase my personal tempo. to basically fit the check-in schedule. Because every week I'm like, I got to get stuff done every week. But actually that was making me less productive on a bigger time scale because I was never giving myself the time to recover and come back to where I was fresh. I was never allowing new ideas to simmer. And so I was always running it like half capacity because I wasn't building in the recovery time, right? Like even elite athletes take time to recover. And I wasn't giving that to myself. And again, this wasn't the VCs. This was me just like dealing badly with that situation. But so I was like, okay, I want less urgency. I don't want to have to do a bunch of management. How does that work? And then you go, well, if you want less urgency, you kind of have to avoid network effects and winner take all dynamics. Because if you have winner take all dynamics, you can't go slowly because being second place is equivalent to being last place. Because whoever wins takes everything. But winner take all dynamics are really appealing to investors because they're very valuable when they work. And so I was like, okay, if I'm avoiding winner take all dynamics, then that naturally pushes me into smaller markets. And if they're smaller markets, it's not that I don't want VCs, it's that VCs don't want me. So it was a case where once I became clear about what I wanted from a business, I realized that that would not be what VCs wanted from a business. So I was like, okay, so how do I do it myself? And then it's questions like you look at your personal constraints and needs. You go like, how quickly do I need to break even? How many months runway do I have? Like, can I afford for this to be a failure and bounce back? Or will that like ruin my whatever, my financial situation, my life, my mental health? And so I started making, this is well talked about in a body of knowledge called effectuation. And it's less focused on how do you make the biggest business, and it's more focused on how do you maximize your chances of succeeding, like with any business, no matter the size. And so I started thinking of it much more through that lens. And I'm like, okay, what do I need right now? What do I want right now? And after the first business, what I wanted was a lot of time to think and reflect. I didn't care about where I was. I didn't care about having a lot of money, but I wanted a lot of time. So when I was thinking about ideas, I'm like, what's the idea I can do that's most likely to break even? Because I was already almost broke. And if the next business failed, I would have been actually bankrupt and I would have had to go get a job or go sleep on my parents' couch or something, which meant moving across an ocean and like a whole cascading set of changes that I didn't really want. So I became very pragmatic in my idea selection, which isn't something I had ever done before. And I was like, wow, suddenly all of these are working. But then the thing is, they're not big, right? Because when you have to have it work and you have to have it monetized quickly, you're adding all these constraints and you have to have a lot of free time during the day. You're adding so many constraints. And so you got to sacrifice somewhere. And what I was sacrificing was upside or growth potential. So I was getting really quickly to break even. I was getting what I wanted. I'm like, cool, it's stable. I can think, I can learn, I can reflect, I can recover. And I found that with each kind of project or business, I went through a stage. I went through about a year just doing stupid things to try them, where I was kind of, I was blogging about it. I called it the Bootstrap Challenge, where I took my last like $10,000 or 10,000 pounds. And it was just like, I'm going to build stupid ideas until I run out of money. And hopefully one of them gets profitable. But then after that, I was like, all right, now I got to get serious. And also by that point, I'd been basically dead broke for years. And I was like, you don't realize, but doing things like going on a date or like meeting friends for dinner, it actually takes a little bit of money. And I'd essentially sacrificed all of that for more than a year because I was so focused on what I was trying to do. And so that was the point where I was like, actually, like, I still want to be bootstrapped. I still want to be semi-relaxed and non-urgent, but I'd also like some earning potential. And so that's where I started to combine like and get a bit more and more serious. And so then we built about $1 million a year education agency pretty quickly. But 3 years in, we couldn't productize it and we found it really difficult to hire. And we couldn't scale it past that without compromising our values. Yeah. So we actually had, what pushed it is we had an $8 million contract from a Middle Eastern country who wanted us to basically run their national, like a slice of their national education system. And there were 4 founders, and that essentially rifted the team because one person said like, to do it morally, they won't accept it. Another person said, well, someone worse than us is going to do it, so we may as well. And then 2 of us said, like, actually, we don't want to do this either way because we want to productize. And this is the opposite of productization. And so we basically split the team on semi-good terms. And the productization fella and I, Devin, we still work together. He went off and started a $1 billion unicorn in the meantime. But then after that, we got back together and we co-founded our next business, which we're still working on.
Nice.
And we also had a loose like skunkwork situation where we both worked on separate stuff, but we shared all the profits. So we spent about 4.5 years where we both all owned half of everything that the other one did, which was pretty cool. And that earned about I think we distributed about $500,000 through that like profit sharing scheme.
Nice.
And now we're building like a real bootstrap business that we think has more upside.
But I think like what you said is really interesting, because I do feel like a lot of people get started as entrepreneur with not always, like the right expectations. And I like your way of thinking of doing it the other way around, not thinking about what you want your company to accomplish first, but about like, okay, what's your lifestyle? What do you like expect as an outcome, and how do you usually work, And as you said, like I think it's Naval, that says about like working like a lion, where you do a lot of things when you are highly productive, and then after that you rest for a long period of time. So like that you can be at your peak form anytime you want, but not always, and burning out and putting tons of stress. And the fact that
I love that.
Yeah.
It's one of the things I really like about writing books is that a book, unlike a business, if you sort of lose your interest in it, you can just set the manuscript aside for 2 months and come back to it when you're fresh and excited. And it doesn't go anywhere. It doesn't backslide. It doesn't lose relevance. Well, as long as you're writing about something evergreen. And so you can take your time. And so I feel with books, I'm only ever working on them when I feel like I'm in the state to do so. And obviously,
when you have inspiration and
there's some self-management. Sometimes you got to put in the time. But if you're really at a wall, you go, actually, I need a month, and that's okay. And the book's still there. So I would love to find that in a tech product. Part of my current business is community, and community is like the opposite of that, where you got to show up every day, every week. There's live events, there's all this stuff. And honestly, it's been a bit of a struggle for me to deal with, given my kind of natural energy cycles and ways of working. But I also think it's really powerful, and I love what we're trying to achieve. So there's like there's a tension there, but that's what the coaches and the complaining to co-founders and all this other stuff is for.
And I think it's I went on your website, which I think is really cool, like with all the topics. And can you maybe like tell us a bit more about what you're trying to achieve? Because right now you're kind of like productizing a service, right?
So are you talking about my personal site or the business site?
Yeah, the personal site, yeah.
Yeah, so my personal site, this is just robfitz.com, and this is basically my blog, really. But I found, so in the past, I started getting relatively successful with blogging. And when I reached about 5,000 email subscribers, I just shut it down, and I never posted again. And I eventually deleted the full email list, and then I deleted the full archive of posts, which is a weird thing to do, but I didn't know how to deal with. It was kind of back to that. I was like, oh, it's like getting successful, and now I have this expectation. I have to do it every week. And I didn't like that. It felt like a job instead of something I was doing for fun. And so, years passed. This was, I don't know, 7 years ago or 10 years ago or something. And I've been writing books since then, and I've been building products, but I missed the idea of just putting out messy ideas. And so I relaunched my personal site, rawfizz.com, through with community software using Circle. And the idea was like, I thought that signaled something, that it's like, hey, I don't know the answers. This isn't a broadcast. This is more of a discussion. Like, like here's a thought, or here's what I'm reading, or here's what I'm struggling with. And that's been great. And then the idea also was to start pulling some of my stuff in from external platforms. So bringing like some old courses I made on Udemy, and eventually bringing them in as paid spaces within the personal site and all of that. So far, it's been great. Really enjoying it. It's still, I'm still figuring out how to deal with the consistency. It just doesn't come naturally to me. But hey, it's something I think is important and exciting. And this is a nice format for me to deal with it. And then the business site, like what the actual business is, well, we have historical income from books. So my 3 books do about $25,000 a month in passive income.
Nice.
And it's growing also, it's good. That's a decent chunk. And we take a piece of that to kind of use, and it gets auto allocated each month as like the bootstrapping fund for the next business. So we don't need to worry about cash flow. And that freed us up to do something that was long-term and took a while to spin up, but without having to go to investors. So we're able to go after a big opportunity that's going to be slow, but on our own way. So that gives us our like operating capital. Then some of it goes out to translators, co-authors, et cetera. And the rest is my living expenses. And it's put us in this lucky situation where we just haven't had to be that concerned about the cash flow for the business, which is usefulbooks.com, where we're trying to build basically tools and support for, we want to unbundle the publishing industry. Because right now, publishing, part of what they do is they're like, we're going to help, we're going to give you advice, like we're going to give you guidance, we're going to keep you on track. But actually, like that's not the publisher's core competence, right? That's just kind of bundled in. So we want to pull all of that out and offer it partly through software, partly through community. So it's like on par with the best support you could get from a publisher or book coach. And then, yeah, if you want to at the end, give the manuscript to a publisher or do it yourself, either way. We don't have a horse in that race. But it's tough. There's a bunch of big moats, and we had to get over some big reputation thresholds. And there was a lot of like some tricky technology to build. It's just been slow all over the place, but we'll know pretty soon whether it's going to work or not. Next 3 months, I'd expect.
Okay. So this is like your main project right now, like the main SaaS you're focusing on?
Yeah. So right now that's doing about 10,000 a month. So it's still in the early stages, but what we haven't proven is any sort of growth loop. So all of our growth right now is driven by, I don't know, like me doing stuff, like, showing up on this podcast.
Being on podcast. Yeah.
Exactly. And I'm like pretty good at like the getting books noticed on Amazon game. And like the book is part of our like deal flow for that also. So it's like, but it's not super growable. And so now we're trying to figure out, is this like a 10 or 20 grand a month business, or is this like a 50 or 100 grand a month business? And we've got a core thesis about the viral loop. So on the software is for beta reading. So when people want feedback on a manuscript, they like put it there and then they invite beta readers. And so far we've seen that for every manuscript that gets like beta read through it, 14 of the readers also sign up and are like, hey, like we want to use this for our books. What we don't know yet is how much attrition there's going to be between that like interest and the actual completion of the loop. Because sometimes there's many months between someone saying, ooh, I want to use this when I write a book, and them saying, actually, the manuscript's now ready. And so it's like, if it works, it's a very powerful viral loop, but it's also just an incredibly slow one to test. So we're kind of just treading water and, improving the tech, working on the community. We're like doing stuff, but we're trying not to make any big decisions right now.
Okay, I see. And is it the only product you focus on, or do you have like multiple SaaS that you have on the side, or is it like the revenue coming mainly from your books? So
the revenue, there's 3 revenue streams. There's there's a book about the book writing process called Write Useful Books, and that kind of because the whole idea of beta reading, a lot of people think they're doing it, but they're doing it wrong. They're getting like biased or superficial feedback, where people basically say it's a good book, but it doesn't actually help them know what to improve. And it's like all feedback. You go, what do you think of my idea? People go, oh, it's really good, but that doesn't correlate with buying behavior. So that's the first product. There's the book itself, which gives like education and guidance to the process. There's the software that supports beta reading. And then there's an outcome-oriented community, which is also a paid product, which basically is like meant to be the glue between people reading the guidebook and people having a finished manuscript that they're ready to beta read. So that's like the retention layer between those two pieces. And then as that works, the biggest tech piece that we built is really slick, like kind of one-click import of manuscripts with the formatting, and it deals with all the messy formats. Right now it does Google Docs, but we'll add more. And if we get that in any other product in the industry, you basically have to copy paste chapter by chapter. Or it misses the formatting, or you have to do wacky like in and out of markdown conversions where you lose all your images and tables. And so now that we have that import, if the viral loop works, or if we can figure out some other growth engine, there's a lot of cool stuff we can do with just this like quick manuscript import. And so like in a perfect world, it would become the home for your book before it has been published, where you start building your pre-launch audience, you engage with your beta readers, you do your pre-sales and early access, you get your pre-launch testimonials and evangelists, like all of that stuff. But, there's no sense worrying about that until we've proven the core thesis.
Yeah, I understand. And I was also curious because you're mentioning like that each month your book are bringing about like 25K in revenue, which I think is really like nice.
It is, yeah. It feels good.
Yeah. And do you like, is it only through recommendation and being like well positioned on Amazon, or do you actually have like some sort of engine where, I don't know, you send the book to some like newsletters or like advertising or?
So my first two are a little bit different than the third. And also I'm double counting revenue because the third book does like 8,000 a month, and we kind of count that in the business income. So I was counting that when I said that the current business is doing 10,000 a month. Okay. The first two books, I think Mom Test does 12,000, 15,000 a month at the moment. And Workshop Survival Guide is sort of the failure of the bunch that does 3,000 to 5,000 a month. And then occasionally we get bulk orders, which is, like an extra few grand from a university or an event or whatever. So the Mom Test, I do 0 active promotion for, and that's almost entirely word of mouth, although I still occasionally pop on a podcast and talk about it. But that one's really well integrated into accelerators and universities. So we get a lot of word of mouth, not always from readers, but sometimes from teachers or mentors. And that was part of my original thesis for the book, because I knew that I didn't want to, like, you do research before you make a product, right? And in books, all of the research is like, these are low cost, undifferentiated products. And there's like several million new ones per year that you're competing with. So the average New York Times nonfiction bestseller peaks within 12 weeks, loses 95% of its peak sales within the year, and never recovers. And so I was like, well, if it's going to take me a year of hard work to create, I don't want that performance curve. So I put all my attention into saying, like, what are the outliers and how do I make sure I'm one of them? And it's basically word of mouth back catalog is what drives the outliers. And Seth Godin, who has a lot of publishing experience, he says that group of books takes 2% of the publishing industry's marketing budget, but drives 90% of their profits. I was like, all right, that's the type of product I want to make, right? No marketing, all profits. You still have to do some stuff to let the early group know. I call this seed marketing. I personally draw a line in the sand at 1,000 copies. And I go, I'll take responsibility for getting the first 1,000 copies to happy readers. And then after that, it's like, and so Mom Test, I just chilled. And it took 6 years, I want to say, before it passed 10,000 a month in royalties. And now it's accelerating because obviously the more people have read it, the more recommendations you get. If the book's good, this is the other thing. Like, not every book deserves to be recommended. And good isn't about beautiful writing. It's about it being useful to the reader. So it's like, the same as a product. It doesn't have to have the most gorgeous design. It needs to solve people's problems. But if you also solve people's problems, gorgeous design also helps. And in some cases, the design is so bad that it prevents people from realizing that it solves their problems. So you need, like, prose is like design, where it's like you need to pass a minimum threshold. After that, it's a nice to have. But what's essential is the value people get out of it. And then the third book, Write Useful Books, is different because that one we've got a whole business on top of. So that one, it makes sense for me to continue actively promoting. And because of that, it's been growing about 12 times faster than the Mom Test did. Like at month 6, it had passed where Mom Test was at year 6. And that's just a case, partly I understand the product category better. So I'm able to build things. I'm able to really exploit the recommendation loop a bit more intentionally. And partly it's because I'm continuing to market it past the first 1,000 copies sold.
And do you feel like, I'm going to rephrase the question, like, would you think that you could actually advertise and promote like the Mom Test a bit more in order to like increase sales? Like, is it something you've tried? Because if you're thinking like, okay, I'm getting like word of mouth and I'm making like 12K per month, why wouldn't I invest, I don't know, like 6K, half of it, and just like put advertising and see what's up, So
part of the problem is that it is, with that book in particular, it's really hard for me to predict which people are going to love it and which are going to hate it. Okay. And word of mouth is useful because, so the Mom Test, if anyone doesn't know, it's basically like how to get unbiased feedback or how to do sales if you're an introverted technical founder, which is me. But it's ended up being really popular in the product management world, which is interesting to me. It's also useful not in the traditional sales world, but in startup sales. And it's also when people are transitioning from traditional sales to startup sales, they often read it to understand what's different between those two worlds. And what I found with advertising is when you advertise, you cast kind of a wide net. And because it has like 1,000 reviews and it keeps a really high star rating and all of that. And so because of the social proof, people would see the ads, buy it, and hate it. And so as soon as I started advertising, I started getting 1-star reviews because the social proof was convincing the wrong people to buy it. And because I couldn't target it accurately enough at the people who it would be perfect for, it's like the wrong people were reading it and they were getting really mad at me. So I'm sure that's a solvable problem. I haven't figured out how to solve it. Write Useful Books is easier, and also Workshop Survival Guide, because both of those, it's more clear from the cover who it's for. And so those we do run ads for. But I'm not a big believer in this. Like, Amazon in particular, imagine a tiny Google PPC ads, but with like much less marketplace liquidity. And so even yourself, as soon as you try to increase volume, you drive the prices up so high. So it's a case where like maybe we sell 50 copies a month, 100 copies a month through the ads, which is fine. You know, it's a trickle. It's fine. But to scale them is just impossible unless there's something we're totally missing. We tried influencer marketing. I did a thing with a dude with 200,000 Instagram subscribers who was exactly in my niche. Paid him $600, which I thought was a great price. He did a really thoughtful review. He pulled out a bunch of great quotes, did some commentary, did a story. As far as I can tell from the metrics, we almost exactly broke even on the $600 we spent, which is a lot lower than I expected. And it's like, well, fine, I can repeat that, but it's not like and it took me a lot of time and attention. We've done some other things. We did a big interactive video course for 2 of the books. The people who we partnered with, they said they were going to email it to 150,000 people and also do display ads to get it in front of another 350,000. Or display ads or podcasts or like content, like, you know, like a lighter thing than an email. So far, I have a trackable link at the end of the course, 0 clicks.
Oh, fuck.
And it's for like a huge giveaway. It's like the greatest lead magnet ever. And it's like, people like, love that course. That's amazing. So good. I got a ton of positive feedback on the course, 0 clicks. So I'm kind of like, you know, it's
Is the link broken?
It's a book. So I'm just like, you know, whatever. Like, books are driven by word of mouth is my current viewpoint. Unless if you figure out something different, please let me know.
But yeah, I think it's really interesting. What I thought of, you know, is like, to me, what I figured out, like what I thought for books, you know, it's like when you know that your book is, you know, like delivering a lot of word of mouth because people usually like it and enjoy it. I think that, you know, like investing in ads is not something where you should always, I mean, my view on this is not something where you should aim always for like a direct ROI. Break even, I think, is something that you should aim for, just because that way you're not losing money for sure. But because you know your book will generate word of mouth, maybe, you know, if you can spend your money into ads, the person that are going to read it will bring you like new users and new like readers because of the word of mouth, and hence down the line will increase the ads. But I don't know to which extent you should do it, you know, and start saying something, because
we tried. It was still just it was low volume per month, at least Amazon. But also we see very different behavior in different categories. Like the Workshop Survival Guide is much easier to advertise than Write Useful Books, because there's a lot of books with like writing advice which compete. My book's not writing advice. It's like how to think of books as a product category. So basically the stuff we've been talking about, but we're competing for the same keywords. And there's so many like self-published authors who are giving like writing about writing. And it's just like the costs get driven up so quickly. But, you know, I think it's worth testing for every author, definitely. And some authors have experimented more broadly. Like Alex Hillman did some newsletter sponsorships in the creative space for his book, Tiny MBA. And he said the return on that was insane. It was like 4-to-1, 5-to-1. He's like, yes, I will buy every ad spot you can give me. And occasionally you find something where it's like a perfect fit between your particular book and your particular audience, and it's underpriced attention. I haven't found that many of them. For me, it's for me.
Well, I mean, you still have something running with a good monthly revenue, so you must be doing something right.
Yeah, we're getting there. We're getting there. Like, you know, Mom Test has done like 100,000 copies sold, and it's accelerating. Wow. And Write Useful Books is just past 10,000 in its first few months. So, you know, they're getting there. I'm happy with the performance, especially since I have no platform. Like I've sent 0 emails about the books, I believe. And, you know, I don't have any real audience. So to me, that's like, okay, there's something in the product. It's not just like people buying them because they like me.
Yeah. And talking about the mom test, I want to spend a bit of time, you know, like how exactly, you know, it could help like entrepreneur ask better questions to their potential customers. So if people don't know like what the mom test is about, like you discussed it a little bit earlier, but can you go back a little bit about why you decided to write this book, and what is the key output people can expect getting from it?
Yeah, I mean, I can tell you the key idea really quickly. It's like, so I wrote it because like I'd read 4 Steps to the Epiphany and I listened to Paul Graham and read his essays, and everyone's like, you got to go talk to your customers. And I did, and I didn't like it. I wanted to be programming, it was uncomfortable for me and it felt like a bad use of my time. But I was like, I have to do this. All the smart people are saying I should, I'm going to do it. And then we still went out of business. And even when the customers told us, they're like, build this, I will use it, or this is what I want, we would do it. And then they still wouldn't use it, or they wouldn't pay for it. So, and it turned out that I was just asking the questions wrong. So there's a huge positive bias when you're describing a product idea or a startup idea where people want to support you. They see your excitement and they want to support that excitement, which is amazing. And this is also why you're able to get your early sales, your early funding, your early employees, your early business partners. So you don't want to get rid of this advantage, but it's really tough to get feedback. And also combined with that, people are really bad at predicting their future behavior. Like every New Year's, people go, yeah, this year I'm going to go to the gym. This year I'm going to plant a garden. And then they don't. Or they buy a product that they never use at home. And so you combine this like positive bias plus this inability to predict future behavior, and how in the world do you get feedback for a product that doesn't exist yet? And the best workaround I found is not to ask people what they think of my idea, but to ask them what they're already doing about that issue in their life and why they're doing it that way. And in some cases that they go, like, let's say you're building a fitness app or a habit tracking app or whatever, you go, hey, what are you doing about this? And they go, nothing. And you go, oh, well, that's interesting, because are they doing nothing because, and sometimes they're a little embarrassed about that. Sometimes they're like, they're clearly frustrated. You can dig into those emotions. Oh, like you seem a little sheepish. Like, what's going on here? What have you tried? They go, I bought this equipment. I bought the Peloton. I joined a gym. I never use it. Oh, why don't you use it? I don't know. And they tell you the stories, or they go, no, I just don't care that much about personal fitness. And you go, oh, okay. Or they make these fake excuses. They go, yeah, it's just the time cost to getting to the gym. It's like, oh, like, have you ever tried like a YouTube video or an app? You just work out at home. They go, no, I don't do that either. And it's like, that person just doesn't want to exercise. So are they going to use your exercise app? That person probably not. Whereas if someone's like, yeah, like, we don't have space in the house for the stationary bike. I joined a gym, but I've got 2 young kids. We're all over the place all the time. It's like, I tried these home exercise YouTube things, but it's like the quality is just terrible. Like, I really want the personal connection. You go, so those are both cases where the person's not currently using a similar product. But in one case, they don't care. And in the other case, they're very much a potential customer for the right solution. And so I found that by just digging into what people are already doing and why, what else they've tried, why they haven't already solved it, like what they started and then gave up on, these stories about their life. And it's not even about your idea. It's about the problem space and the customer. I found that suddenly I was getting this foundation of insight from which I could take my own like visionary leap to a product, to a business, to a solution. Still not 100% right, but it made my guesses much closer to correct. And then I had this like understanding about the customer to make sense of what happened afterwards. So they go, I'm not going to use it that much. And I go like, I think I understand why. Or I can go and talk to them more and understand their life more. Same way you talk to a friend. Like a friend goes, I have a problem. You don't go, you need my new website. the friend goes, I have a problem. You go, tell me more about that. That must be awful. How did this happen? Like, what are you going to do about it? And if you can understand your customers like you understand your friends in that way, then suddenly product development gets so easy.
That's that's true. And do you feel like, because something I found a lot, like in people doing user research is that, and especially like as we're scaling the team, I'm not always the one running like the user interview anymore. And from time to time, like I go through user interviews and I see people asking like direct questions, or asking them like, how do you do that, etc. And from how people do things, you feel like you are forced to like find a solution when actually what would be needed is for them to do things differently. You know what I mean? So how exactly like would you approach like this type of situation, or for people whenever like they're running like user interviews? Because you could ask people how they're doing things, but if they are doing it the wrong way, which happens a lot, I feel, like, how do you go, like, okay, how do I make sure that I educate them to do the right thing?
So education takes a long time. I'm not sure I know the answer here. In 4 Steps to the Epiphany, Steve Beinke had this concept of like market categories, which kind of got dropped from Lean Startup. But one of them was almost like a future problem or like an unknown problem where you know it's important, but it's in the future. So things like 3D printing are probably in this category, where everyone agrees that like, yeah, that's important, but like the customers aren't fully aware of what their issue is and how they can use this product. And Steve's solution was just like add 5 years to your plans, because you got to wait for the, like, educating a market takes a long time. So he's like, yeah, raise enough money so you can wait for 5 years. And then once they've figured it out, like, you'll have the best products and you'll be ready. That's obviously not very practical if you're bootstrapping. Some people do it with an audience first thing, where they start with the content marketing and the audience building. And what that does is it both like plants a flag to attract people who already get it, and it begins to educate the people who almost get it. And then that becomes your customer segment. So your segment isn't the whole industry. It's like the people who listen to you. That's fine, but building an audience is also slow. In some cases, you can identify the people who are a little bit further ahead in the self-awareness or the early adopter curve. Crypto and Nifties are doing a good job of this. Like, you know, like they're not really trying to convince everyday people this, like, hey, go buy a Nifty today. They're like taking the people who are like, have come to it by themselves and they're right on the margins. And they're like, hey, you know, let's bring you in. And then over time, like that group, hasn't all lost their money or gone to jail. And so like the next group a little bit further out on the toward late adopters, the next group, but still quite toward early, they're like, oh, maybe it's not crazy. Let me try. And as the technology gets better and everything catches up, I don't know. I don't think that's general advice. And it's also dangerous advice, because it's easy to take that and then lie to yourself, where you go like, well, we've been doing this for a long time and nothing's working, but that's just because we need to wait longer, which is obviously how you get really, really hurt. And so this is a case where I don't think I can give a general answer, but I've gotten a lot of value personally from talking to other entrepreneurs about my specific situation in either one-on-ones or in little brain trusts or masterminds, a place where you feel safe to be like, you know, am I crazy here? Like, what do I do? But the decision to shut down is the most the personal decision of all. And it's hard. It's hard.
And if we take, let's say, like a bootstrap entrepreneur who's just starting, how would you go about validating your idea? Because we see a lot of people who are doing, I think we still have this, and whether you're like learning entrepreneurship at school or whether you like reading like some blog post or things like that, you would have people telling you like, you have to start with your business plan, then the segment, then the person, then run customer interviews, etc. And to me, as an entrepreneur, and you know, I built like several SaaS products, sold also a few, and I'm always thinking like, in the end, back then I used to do that, but I found it so useless. Then I just decided, okay, I'm gonna build it because it solved one of my problem, and then when people buy, I know that it's validated. But with like your approach, how would you maximize, you know, like those customers interview, and how would you go through, because you faced it yourself, you know, when people are telling you like, hey Rob, like awesome product, and then it's like, well, actually, we don't need it anymore, you know, or like, oh, well, no, we don't have the budget. And they, you know, they come up with something like this.
Yeah. So I don't see the customer development or the mom test or customer interviews, let's say, I don't see it as a process that you have to do. I see it as a customer conversations are a tool in your toolkit for learning. In some situations, it's a really valuable tool and it can get you like almost all the way there. In other situations, it's a much less valuable tool. So for example, the iPhone, Uber, Instagram, a lot of phone apps, a lot of consumer products, video games, Facebook, none of these would have had huge benefit from extended customer interviews. Whereas something like if you're solving a well-defined problem for a business customer, you can get almost 100% validation before writing a line of code, like everything except money being sent to your bank account. And so personally, I think it's always helpful to talk to a couple customers, if only to like bullshit check yourself to see if you actually care about them. Because as you know, building a business or a product, it's measured in years. And if you don't enjoy talking to that customer, if you feel cynical about them, if you don't respect them, if you don't empathize with them, you're very likely to give up on the business after you get like halfway. And so for me, it's partly like, I want to talk to at least a few just to make sure I really care. It's like kind of a first check for myself. And then in some cases, you're like, wow, I don't understand them at all. Or it feels like there's a mystery in the market where you're like, wait, why does this person care and this person doesn't? I thought they were the same. What's going on here? And so often I'll want to pull on those mysteries. And I realize that there's some important customer segmentation issue or industry issue. You're like, why hasn't this already been solved? Or you Google it and you're like, there's like 5 products out here already that do this. Why aren't people already using those? So those little mysteries always draw my attention and I kind of want to answer them. Nice. But then if you've got a well-defined problem for a customer who understands their problem and wants to pay money to solve it, like, yeah, you should do a lot of conversations. In those cases, you can line up the pre-sales, really strong validation, really clear understanding. You can build out a customer advisory board. In those cases, it's like a superpower. For consumer stuff, like in my current business, we don't do a lot of explicit cus dev conversations, but we do have a customer community. And so in the customer community, well, one, people pay to be in it. So like that is a revenue stream. And then also in the early days, the first 50 people who joined, part of the onboarding was to set up a one-on-one call with me to talk about their problems. So they would join and be like, hey, how's your book? Like, what are your issues? What are you worried about? Where are you at? What's next for you? That was like a dream cus dev conversation. And I didn't even have to schedule them. I didn't even have to do outreach. People scheduled it with me. And then they would just spend 30 minutes talking about all of their problems and frustrations. And, I'm taking notes and sharing it with my team. And that's part of what helped validate the business for us. Whereas if I was trying to cold call people or send emails or reach out to people on LinkedIn, hey, can I talk to you about your book? They're like, no, like you're going to try to upsell me some sleazy consulting or coaching or whatever, vanity press service. So in the consumer cases, I think you need to be a lot more clever about creating a situation where your customers want to have that conversation with you and where they feel comfortable doing so. And then one other thing you mentioned, like sometimes user research conversations or customer conversations go wrong. This is true. I don't think you're ever going to get down to 0% bias. And I don't think you're ever going to get up to 100% like perfect execution. I still screw up my conversations. But what you want to get to is the ability to distinguish between good data and bad data so that you can throw away the bad data and take the good data seriously. And if you run a quick conversation, a 10-minute user interview or whatever, and you get 1 or 2 pieces of good data, you're like, great. Even if it's all bad data, you go like, okay, why was that so unhelpful? Is that because I need to change the way I run the interviews? Or was I just talking to someone who was having a bad day? Like if someone's on the call with you because they promised they would do it, but their kid is sick, like they don't care. You are not going to have a good conversation with them, right? Their head's in another place. They're worried about other stuff, or their boss just yelled at them, or they have a big presentation coming up at work, or there's a million reasons why your interview with them is not the most important part of their day. So I don't think you can expect to get to 100% success rate. And I don't think you can get to 100% confidence. But, if you can determine which is which for yourself, then you can still get enough good data from a representative subset to make the decisions you need.
And do you like record on Zoom your interviews like all the time so you can rewatch them and kind of like improve? Is it something that you actively do whenever you're running like a customer interview?
I did religiously when I was learning the skill because it's really hard when you're learning it. Especially like I'm ADHD, and a big part of ADHD is being like hypersensitive and like swinging and like not being, let's say, super emotionally aware of what's happening. So I found that in the interviews themselves, I was unable to figure out how they went. And basically, if someone was nice to me, I would think they were a customer. And if someone was mean to me, and often it was the opposite, like the nice people wouldn't be customers, but the mean people would end up buying because they were just really trying to figure out if it was right for them. And so I learned to not trust my emotional interpretation of the meeting. And the way to deal with that was to take good notes and then afterwards review the notes. And then I also found that I tried recording some and my team would just never watch them. And I'm like, why am I recording these if you don't watch them? And so I started, but I realized that they would read sentences or they would watch snippets if those bits were really high value. So there's a couple apps that make this easy now on Zoom. One is called grain.co, I think. And there's another one called Build Better, buildbetter.app. And they both basically record, transcribe, and allow you to pull out relevant snippets that you can share really quickly to the team Slack or Notion or wherever. And it's just that like 60 seconds or 30 seconds where the good bit comes. And tools like that are amazing. What we're doing now on my team is we're still doing manual onboarding for the software. And we basically have that on a round robin Calendly setup. So each user gets onboarded, one with me, one with Devin, one with Mark, and so on. And so it means we all get a bit of exposure, and we still occasionally share like weird or interesting or amazing stuff that happened. But because we're all getting that firsthand exposure, the recording and the sharing is less necessary.
And do you track retention per person who onboarded the user?
we don't have enough volume to be able to do that. I think right now that would just be a witch hunt.
And
I have seen that play out though. There was a while I was helping a buddy of mine who ran 3 chiropractic studios. And there was massive retention differences depending on which therapist, which physiotherapist the first appointment was with. And it was to the tune of it was like a 300% difference in lifetime value between one therapist and another. And so what the dude did is he reconfigured his whole thing because he realized he could spend 3 times as much on paid advertisements if it was always this one woman doing the first appointment. So basically he shifted her job to be the onboarding person. And the first appointment was always with her, which let him pay triple for advertising. And then after they'd been seeing the value through her, he could move the patients to his other practitioners.
That's crazy. That's really interesting. I mean, we got like tons of learnings from this episode, and I'm sure like all the bootstrappers are gonna love it. I want to be like also cautious of your time. I usually like finish like the episode with like 3 questions. The first one is, what's your favorite like podcast or book?
Man, there's so many books right now. For the business books I've read recently that I really, really loved was Never Split the Difference. This book came out a couple of years ago, but it's still so good. It's about negotiation by Chris Voss. He was the lead FBI hostage negotiator. And I learned so much about a different type of like conversation that I'd never thought about before. Another one was Ben Horowitz's recent book called, not The Hard Thing About Hard Things, but the other one, What You Do Is Who You Are.
Okay.
So good. It's about building culture and how the leader's behavior and actions and some very like interesting stories and also counterintuitive lessons about how you demonstrate the culture or the lack thereof or whatever, and how things can backfire in amusing and unexpected ways. That one was excellent. There's so many good books right now. I don't know. Yeah.
No, that's nice.
One other I'll shout out for is just because it was helpful to me personally was Sherry Walling's book called The Entrepreneur's Guide to Keeping Your Shit Together. And she basically takes the uncertainty, the anxiety, the overwhelm that we all feel on this journey and sort of presents each as a 2-sided coin. It's like, you're anxious because you care. Like it feels uncertain because you're carving your own path. And, I found that book really helpful for dealing with the negative emotions.
Oh, that's cool. Yeah, like it. We'll put the links to the 3 books you mentioned. Second question is, who's your favorite Bootstrap founder and also why?
So from pure pragmatism, probably Jason Cohen, a smart bear. And, I know he's raised funding since then, but like he had this brilliant like exchange in his blog where he was sort of, this was years ago, but he was talking about how he set up his business and how he got it to 40,000 a month or whatever it was. And someone in the comments goes, yeah, but it's easy for you. You've got 100,000 person like email list. And he goes, yeah, I do. It took me 10 years to build. And this is why I've been telling you for 10 years that you should start building an email list, because you build the asset in advance to use it later. So he's like, start doing it now. And then in 10 years, other people will be blaming you for your unfair advantage. And the other one, just for like authenticity and friendliness and helping the community, is probably Arvid Kahl, who wrote The Embedded Entrepreneur and The Bootstrap Founder. Mm-hmm. He's a great dude.
Yeah, really nice. I'm meeting with him actually in a few hours.
Perfect. Tell him I said hey.
Nice. And the last thing, because we also talked a bit, about the tough times, uncertainty, doubts. What is the one thing that you do to kind of like regain energy and motivation when you feel down?
So for me, writing is the anchor habit, and it doesn't have to be writing a book. It can be, I think this came from a book called The Artist's Way by Julia Cameron, but she talks about daily pages. Just writing or waking up, and before you get into your work, just like a brain dump, just write. And just long form. No one's going to read it. No one's going to see it. You throw it away when you're done. But just like it pulls out all these things that are holding your attention hostage, or at least for me, it does. And I often find myself realizing that I have priorities or tasks that I wasn't even fully aware of. So when I'm working on the book, I enjoy that as well. Sometimes that replaces it, but I find I need that writing in my day. And then recently also, I've been finding cold water really helpful, because if I get into these anxiety spirals, right? And like once I'm anxious, it's really hard to think clearly about the solution. And like it's usually solvable on a systems level, right? You change something about your system to remove the source of the anxiety. But for me, once I'm in it, it's like super hard to see clearly and to debug. And so, hop in a freezing shower or a cold bath or whatever. We live in the mountains. So we got like rivers and waterfalls and stuff. Just jump in this icy mountain water. It's like,
it wakes you up.
Yeah. And it like your body is like, I am in extreme danger right now. Right. So it like throws away the anxiety to focus on what's happening. And then it like opens up this space where I find that I can think more rationally for a little bit about the problems. But yeah, writing in cold water.
Nice. I like that. Well, Rob, thanks a lot for spending the time with us. And also I'd love for our listeners to be able to kind of like follow your journey, what you're up to. So what's the best way for them to find you online or connect?
robfitz.com is where I put my messy work in progress. And that's got links to all my books and everything like that. You can ask questions. We do little Q&A events occasionally. And, if you have a question, I'll record a video and try to be as helpful as I am able.
Awesome. Well, thanks a lot, Rob. Sorry. It was really awesome having you here, and have a great day.
Likewise. It's been a pleasure.
Take care.